On August 21st, 2007, the gaming landscape was changed forever when Bioshock released for Xbox 360 and Windows PC. With its exceptional gameplay, environmental design, and storyline all envisioned by developer Irrational Games' creative lead Ken Levine, Bioshock went on to be heralded as one of the greatest games of all time, spawning 2 sequels that further explored the game's world. While the future of the series is currently unknown, with a 4th game being in development but unseen since at least 2019, as well as a similar film adaptation at Netflix since 2022, I, Suggestive Gaming, decided to finally take the suggestion of my audience to cover this highly beloved and highly requested franchise. Seeing as this wouldn't be a Suggestive Gaming video without a bevy of caveats at the beginning, let's get those out of the way. Luckily, Bioshock is a series with only 3 main games, 2 story-based DLCs, and 2 books, all of which I'll be referring to as canon and including in this video. However, I will be ignoring the There's Something in the Sea and Industrial Revolution online materials that were released around Bioshock 2 and Bioshock Infinite's launches, respectively. There were also several gameplay-centric DLCs released for Bioshock 2 and Bioshock Infinite that have context within the story, but I'll be leaving those out since their canonicity is questionable and they're pretty insignificant anyway. With that being said, 2007's Bioshock and 2010's Bioshock 2 explore the underwater city of Rapture, while 2013's Bioshock Infinite takes place in Columbia, a city in the clouds. These 2 narratives connect both thematically and in other ways that are way too spoilery for an intro section, but they are indeed separate stories. So for the sake of this video, I'll cover the events of Rapture before looping back around to cover Columbia. Should also be noted that due to the way the story of Bioshock Infinite, and especially its DLC Burial at Sea, unfolds, I'm going to recount some of the events of the story slightly out of chronological order. Trust me, I'm going to try to make this make sense, folks. Now, without further ado, this is what you need to know about Bioshock. Our story begins in 1918, where we find a young boy named Andrei Ryanovsky with his father Pyotr as the pair flee their home country of Russia to escape the communist regime. During their escape, Andrei is forced to helplessly watch his aunt and cousin be executed by the Red Guard for their opposition to the party. Upon arrival to the United States, the Ryanovskys anglicize their names, and Andrei becomes known as Andrew Ryan. Growing up, Ryan begins to idealize great individuals, crediting them for the goods of society while blaming the parasites who gain through socialist handouts. At some point, Ryan strikes oil and invests wisely with his newfound wealth to become one of the most powerful men in the country. In 1945 in New York City, Andrew Ryan is shown photos of the aftermath of the nuclear attacks on Hiroshima by his chief of security, a man named Sullivan. Fearing the end of civilization through atomic warfare and seeing an opportunity to rebuild a new world free of government interference, Ryan decides to spend the entirety of his accrued wealth to build a fortress dedicated to freedom. Ryan then calls this project Rapture. Ryan discovers a plumber named Bill McDonough, who shares his pride in individual performance and hires him on as the building engineer and general contractor for his new project. He also recruits Reuben Greavy, another engineer that helps with the design process. While Andrew and his crew work on Rapture in secret, various political and governmental agencies attempt to uncover his plans. The FBI recruits a con man known only as Frank Gorland to look into the project, but he instead decides to work alone, knowing that whatever Ryan's involved in must require a massive bankroll. Gorland soon learns that Ryan's plans somehow involve building a city underwater in the North Atlantic. As Ryan continues to work on Rapture, an underwater city where his social experiment of the power of self-interest can be tested, he begins to recruit the exceptional individuals to fill it with. Included among them are eccentric artist Sander Cohen, along with one of his chorus girls, Jasmine Jolene, Irish brothers and architects Simon and Daniel Wales, and genius Korean scientist Yi Soo Chong. Construction on Rapture continues into the next year, and Frank Gorland continues poking around the operation. Soon, Gorlin learns that a fisherman and smuggler named Frank Fontaine had been delivering fish to Ryan's workers, and the conman decides that the best way into the construction operation would be by supplying it. Gorlin then meets Captain Fontaine and kills the man, taking his fleet and identity in the process. At this point, Frank Gorland becomes Frank Fontaine. The next year, 1947, Ryan completes his grand entrance to Rapture, a large lighthouse based on Alexandrian designs, which houses a remote-controlled bathysphere to take passengers down to the undersea city. Just before, however, Ryan erects a massive statue of himself, as well as his decree for his free market utopia. No gods or kings, only man. With the city's preliminary construction now completed, Ryan spends the year recruiting those like-minded individuals to join him in Rapture, including Bill McDonough, Ryan's secretary and Bill's fiancée Elaine, Reuben Greavy, Sullivan, the Wales brothers, Sander Cohen, Prentice Mill, who develops the Atlantic Express railway system in the city, as well as Diane McClintock, Ryan's new personal assistant and love interest, among many others. His one rule to the city's inhabitants: once you enter Rapture, you can never return to the surface. Meanwhile, Fontaine, or the man still claiming to be him, continues selling fish to Ryan's project while obsessing about gaining entrance to the city under the sea. After he is able to turn Fontaine's fisheries into a successful organization, Ryan takes notice and sends Sullivan to personally invite the man, who he believes to simply be a go-getter entrepreneur, to live in Rapture. This invitation is immediately accepted by Fontaine. Within Rapture, several businesses begin to sprout up, including Sinclair Solutions, founded by pharmaceuticals investor Augustus Sinclair. Sinclair brings up his concerns about a new employee named Bridget Tenenbaum to Sullivan, fearing that she's been conducting some experiments on human subjects that go far beyond even his own loose morals, pointing to her rumored association with Nazi scientists. By 1949, Fontaine gets his Fontaine's Fisheries business up and running in Rapture. While Ryan suspects that the boats going in and out of the fishery could be a source of potential leaks to and from the outside world, Fontaine assures him that his operation will remain clean. Also that year, Elaine, now married to Bill, gets pregnant, and she's examined by Tenenbaum and Dr. Suchong. Afterwards, Bill goes to leave, but overhears Ryan speaking with Suchong about an experiment. Bill investigates and finds another researcher named Gil Alexander experimenting on a man inside of a glass tube whose body is seemingly being fused with metal. In 1950, about 2 years into Rapture's lifetime, Ryan's greatest fear realizes itself when he learns of rumblings of the working class discussing unionization, infecting Ryan's utopia with the very parasites he created it to escape. Additional contraband, such as religious texts, also begin to pop up, showing more cracks in Ryan's envisioned society. To combat this, Ryan plans to start a new program of civic education, bringing in someone to help train Rapture citizens that wish to return to the surface that the outside world is the real prison. This turns out to be Dr. Sophia Lamb, a psychiatrist specializing in radical experimentation, who opens up her own clinic to start treating those who start causing trouble. Around this time, Tenenbaum falls out of Ryan's favor, and one night she comes across a deck worker who had somehow miraculously regained use of his paralyzed hand. The worker claims that they had found a sea slug mixed in with their fishnets, and when it bit him, it somehow cured his paralysis. Tenenbaum then buys the specimen from the man. Meanwhile, Sophia Lamb begins to realize that the Rapture experiment will very likely fail eventually. She then begins to plot her own social experiment to take place in the event that Andrew Ryan falls and she is able to lead Rapture. The following year, Frank Fontaine calls Tenenbaum and Suchong to a meeting. Fontaine, as it turns out, has been behind the smuggled-in contraband as part of his efforts to sow the seeds of distrust in Ryan to eventually overthrow him and take control of Rapture. Fontaine recruits the scientists to work on research for him. Suchong is tasked to focus on his gene splicing experiments, while Tenenbaum is asked about her research into the sea slugs, which Ryan has no interest in funding. The scientists agree to work for Fontaine under Ryan's radar, with Suchong requesting not only money, but human specimens for his experiments, namely young children whose cells have more possibility for growth. In 1953, Tenenbaum discovers a genetic material inside of the sea slugs, and she calls it Adam. With Adam, Tenenbaum is able to create serums, called plasmids, that can rewrite a host's DNA, giving them new abilities. These abilities need constant re-energization, however, which is provided from a consumable substance that Tenenbaum appropriately names Eve. She also theorizes that while there's only a finite amount of Adam and Eve the slugs can produce on their own, if the parasitic slugs are implanted in human hosts, they could create Adam factories. By the next year, Fontaine opens Fontaine Futuristics to focus on the research and production of Adam and the plasmid serums that give their users extraordinary superhuman abilities, from controlling fire, ice, and electricity to becoming faster and stronger. Suchong works to get plasmid users control over their new powers, but soon learns that overdosing is a very real and very worrying possibility. Those that consume too much Adam cause their bodies and minds to mutate, leaving them as deformed, violent creatures which become known as splicers. Quickly, plasmids become wildly popular among Rapture's citizens, putting Fontaine in an extremely powerful economic position. This creates an extremely public power struggle between Fontaine Futuristics and Ryan Industries. In 1955, Sophia Lamb's followers, who had been growing in the shadows, create an explosive demonstration in a section of Rapture called Hephaestus as a political warning. This act of defiance brings Lamb's anti-Ryan sentiments into the spotlight, and Ryan is forced to take her seriously. That same year, a deep-sea diver known only as Johnny Topside accidentally discovers Rapture and is brought to Andrew Ryan's attention. Ryan finally grows frustrated and has Johnny Topside arrested, along with Sophia Lamb. Lamb is then taken to Persephone, a secret prison operated by Augustus Sinclair, where Ryan sends those who threaten Rapture's ideals. This doesn't faze the woman, however, as she knows her daughter will soon rise up, while she plans her own uprising from inside the undisclosed gulag. Sophia begins to work with the prison warden to recruit her fellow patients for experimentation, but unbeknownst to him and Sinclair, she also takes the opportunity to indoctrinate these subjects with her ideology, creating sleeper agents and preparing them for her signal to spring into action. As the threat of plasmid abuse and addiction grows in the underwater city, Ryan and his Rapture Council agree to throw aside their ideals temporarily to attempt to regulate their use and get the growing splicer problem under control. Coincidentally, Sander Cohen begins his own twisted experimentation with Adam around this time. Meanwhile, Fontaine continues to consolidate his power, attacking Ryan directly by using his growing wealth to open charity organizations. He establishes the Little Sisters Orphanage, ostensibly to care for Rapture's orphans, but in reality to harvest Adam more efficiently. Fontaine and Tenenbaum implant sea slugs into young girls, transforming them into little sisters who can rapidly produce Adam. In the absence of her mother, Sophia, Eleanor Lamb is placed in the care of singer Grace Holloway. However, when Eleanor sees that her mother's property, Dionysus Park, has been trashed and bankrupted by reporter Stanley Poole, she attempts to confront the man. Out of fear, Stanley captures Eleanor and sells her to Fontaine's orphanage. In 1956, Ryan has an ongoing affair with Jasmine Jolene, the chorus girl working with Sander Cohen. This leads to a pregnancy, but Jolene finds herself unable to tell Ryan. Sometime in 1957, Dr. Sophia Lamb enacts her grand plan, as she gives her signal. This unleashes her army of sleeper agents inside the prison walls of Persephone. Sinclair and the warden flee in the ensuing riots, giving Sophia and her followers, known as butterflies, control over Persephone. Continuing his war with Ryan, Fontaine begins to spread communist propaganda under the pseudonym of Atlas. The underprivileged begin to look to Atlas for hope as they begin to grow resentful of Andrew Ryan's massive wealth and control over Rapture. Knowing that the only way to gain control over Rapture would be by igniting a civil war, Fontaine has his men kill 3 of Ryan's constables in the city square as a public first shot. Meanwhile, Fontaine Futuristics focuses on ways to keep Fontaine ahead of Ryan. Knowing that the day will come when he'll need to use his own product, Fontaine has his researchers work on a way to minimize plasmid side effects. Tenenbaum and Suchong are also able to persuade Jasmine Jolene to sell her unborn child. With the promise of financial freedom, Jolene accepts, and Tenenbaum extracts the zygote, giving Fontaine his ace in the hole, Andrew Ryan's own son. Fontaine instructs Suchong to experiment on the child, who is called Jack, starting with accelerated aging so the boy will grow to adulthood within a year's time. More importantly, however, is the mental conditioning Fontaine requests, to be able to command this new sleeper agent to do anything he's asked, regardless of what it is, so long as the right cue words are used. As Suchong begins to work on the boy, implanting him with false memories as he lays in an incubator of the doctor's design, Tenenbaum begins to sympathize with all the children they've been forced to experiment on by Fontaine, as Jack is taken to the surface to live his fabricated life while he awaits his new master's command. The powder keg of unrest finally blows when Andrew Ryan's heavily armed men raid Fontaine's businesses to investigate the smuggling operations. During the raid, one of the constables kills Frank Fontaine, who cleverly foresaw it coming and used the opportunity to fake his own death. In the wake of Fontaine's death, Ryan nationalizes his former businesses, in direct contradiction to his hatred of government control of industry. Soon, Ryan uncovers the truth behind the Little Sisters orphanage. However, instead of ending the operation, he forces Suchong and Tenenbaum to continue their work for him. Soon, however, the pair run out of sea slugs to extract Adam from, and with most of Fontaine's supplies now missing, they're forced to turn to a much more grim solution to keep the newly christened Ryan plasmids in business. The pair of doctors discover that after a plasmid user dies, there's a short period where their atom can be extracted. A little sister who can sense and extract the atom with a syringe, however, must do this process. As the little sisters are fragile, Suchong works with Gil Alexander on his human-machine hybrids, using Johnny Topside as Subject Delta. Subject Delta's memories are erased, and he's assigned to protect Eleanor Lamb, now turned little sister, and the pair bond together. This surrogate father-daughter relationship repeats itself with every pairing of these large armored diving suit donning protectors and their little sisters, who affectionately refer to their guardians as Big Daddies. Taking up the mantle of Atlas, the man formerly known as Frank Fontaine finally shows his face to the downtrodden workforce of Rapture. Bellowing from his soapbox with a freshly disguised Irish accent, Atlas soon recruits enough supporters to ignite his long-awaited civil war. Along with several splicers Atlas was able to recruit using the atom he was able to smuggle away during his fake death, the group prepare their first strike. On the night of New Year's Eve, 1958, Subject Delta and his little sister, the girl who was once Eleanor Lamb, avoid a group of splicers while on a routine atom gathering. It's at this moment that Dr. Sophia Lamb emerges from the shadows to recover her daughter. Using her influential abilities, she's able to command Subject Delta to take a pistol from her before firing it into his own head, killing Eleanor's daddy before her mother takes her with her back to Persephone. Just after Rapture's elites toast to 1959 during a New Year's masquerade ball, Atlas's army attacks the Kashmir restaurant where the event is taking place. While Ryan wasn't at the New Year's celebration event, he takes the attack personally, and while Bill McDonough, one of his few remaining confidants, pleads with him to instead make peace, Ryan decides that the only way to stop the war is to win it. In the wake of the attack, Rapture's hysterical citizens start flocking to the banks to withdraw their funds. Ryan expects it will cause economic collapse, but his desire for a free market stops him from intervening. Ryan's growing tyrannical actions continue to shrink his circle of trust, when he forces his longtime chief of security, Sullivan, to kill a musician named Anna Culpepper for speaking out against him and Sander Cohen, whose growing Adam addiction has turned him into a murderous lunatic. Sullivan complies, but his guilt proves too overwhelming, causing him to disassociate from Ryan while planning to take his own life. Similarly, Bridget Tenenbaum has her own change of heart and decides to free the little sisters she had been working on. After escaping Ryan plasmids with the girls, Tenenbaum finds an abandoned dorm she fashions into a safe house. There, she begins to take care of the little sisters, while working on her own, in secrecy, on a way to return them back to normal. Ryan's walls close further in when he learns about Jasmine Jolene's pregnancy, as well as the subsequent sale of their child to Fontaine, from a recording left to him by the scorned Sullivan. Ryan confronts Jolene, and while she tries to explain that Tenenbaum promised the pregnancy wouldn't be completed, in his rage, Ryan ends up strangling and killing his former mistress. Finally, having enough of Ryan's hypocrisy and the increasing level of violence in the war-torn city, Bill McDonough decides to get his family out of Rapture and back to the surface. Still caring for the city, Bill decides that the only way to end the war is to kill Andrew Ryan. Planning on sending off his family without him, McDonough goes to his former employer's office. There, Bill pulls a gun on Ryan, but he finds himself unable to pull the trigger. Ryan attacks Bill with his walking stick, but Bill responds with a strike from the butt of his pistol, knocking the man unconscious. Bill decides to leave Ryan breathing and escapes to reunite with his family. As Bill, his wife, and their daughter take the bathysphere up to the lighthouse, they're met inside by Ryan's constables. Bill reasons with them to at least allow Bill's family to escape, and they say their goodbyes before leaving him alone with the constables. In one final act of mercy to their former friend, Ryan's men give Bill McDonough a quick death in the form of a single gunshot. Back underwater, the civil war between Atlas and Ryan rages on, and it's during this turbulent time that an atom-fueled arm race begins between the two sides. As Atlas's forces discover more powerful plasmids, Ryan's loyalists fight back with their own discoveries, leading to more and more skirmishes throughout the city. Sinclair Solutions takes advantage of the ongoing warfare, using it to field test various plasmids by recruiting volunteer test subjects. In 1960, Atlas finally uses his ace in the hole and sends Jack a package on the surface, disguised as a gift purportedly from his parents, whom he has fake implanted memories of. Jack then boards a plane from San Francisco to London on the auspices of visiting his cousin, who was also fabricated. During the flight, Jack opens his gift and finds a letter along with a pistol. The letter gives Jack instructions to hijack the plane before crash landing it in the North Atlantic, near the coordinates of the lighthouse. More importantly, however, is the way the instructions are given. The letter is preempted by the code phrase Suchong programmed into Jack to obey Fontaine's commands. Would you kindly? Jack, left in a zombie-like state, unknowingly follows the instructions, bringing the plane down at the commanded location. Jack then awakens among the burning wreckage in the water, and he swims towards the only landmark he can find, an out-of-place, massive lighthouse. Meanwhile, one of Sinclair Solutions' field testing subjects returns to their apartment, where they hear Andrew Ryan making an emergency announcement. Ryan informs Rapture's inhabitants that a threat even stronger than the Civil War has arrived. Ryan explains the airplane crash and states that a lone survivor is currently infiltrating the lighthouse. Ryan instructs all Rapture citizens to focus on the external threat until it's contained, using a pheromone gas developed by Suchong pumped through the vents to further control their desires. The Splicer subject is then left to simply watch the airplane sink to the depths outside their apartment window. Jack enters the lighthouse and gazes upon the massive statue of Andrew Ryan alongside his decree for the city of Rapture. Jack finds the bathysphere housed inside the lighthouse and enters, feeling compelled to pull the lever inside. Jack then rides the bathysphere below the waters, where he is finally reintroduced, although he's unaware, to his birthplace of the underwater city of Rapture. When the bathysphere reaches its destination, Jack is introduced to his first splicer. When it scurries off, Jack overhears a voice from a nearby shortwave radio, asking if he would kindly pick it up. Jack does so, and the man on the other end introduces himself as Atlas, maintaining his freedom fighter ruse while continuing to command his unknowing agent through Rapture. Soon, Jack discovers his first plasmid and injects himself with it, giving him the atom-based powers needed to fight off the splicer threat. Atlas asks for Jack's help to find his family in the Neptune's Bounty section of Rapture. On his way, Jack comes across a little sister and watches as her big daddy arrives to viciously protect her from a splicer. Soon, Ryan discovers them and locks down the entrance to Neptune's Bounty, believing Jack to be some kind of government agent sent to disrupt Rapture. Jack searches for another way to the port to rendezvous with Atlas, and after fighting through a deranged plastic surgeon named Steinman, he witnesses a splicer kill a big daddy. As the splicer attempts to harvest the atom from its bonded little sister, however, Tenenbaum arrives and shoots him dead. Atlas mocks Tenenbaum over the radio, blaming her for creating the little sisters in the first place, but the doctor pleads with Jack to use a plasmid she successfully developed, which can return the little sisters to their original state. While Atlas instead urges Jack to harvest the pure atom from the sea slugs inside the girls, which would subsequently kill them, the decision is ultimately left up to Jack. This remains the case for all little sisters Jack comes across in Rapture. Once Jack reaches Neptune's Bounty, Atlas tells him that he'll be at Fontaine Fisheries, where his family is in a hidden submarine. To get there, Jack is forced to retrieve a research camera to take photographs of various splicers for a fisherman named Peach Wilkins. While Jack cooperates, the paranoid Wilkins believes him, and by extension Atlas, to be working for Fontaine, and he attacks. Jack is forced to kill the man before heading into the hidden smuggler's submarine bay. Atlas arrives and asks Jack to use a nearby control panel to open the submarine to free his family, but Ryan watches and unleashes splicers to attack. Jack is forced to watch through the window as the submarine is destroyed, separating him and Atlas once more as the two separately escape the destruction. Feigning vengeance for his supposed family's death, Atlas states that Ryan must be ended once and for all. With his new destination given to him, Jack makes his way towards Andrew Ryan's office. On his travels, Jack meets Julie Langford, a botanist who Ryan kills after poisoning her trees, as well as the extremely demented Sander Cohen. While trying to get the keys to Ryan's office from Cohen, Jack is forced to take part in one of his twisted displays of art by killing and taking photos of various former disciples of the artists. While doing so, Jack discovers the corpse of Jasmine Jolene and learns of her affair with Andrew Ryan and the events that transpired. Jack is still oblivious to the fact that he and the purchased baby were one and the same, and he unknowingly leaves the corpse of his mother behind as he continues on. After Jack completes Cohen's masterpiece, the artist reveals himself so he can view it up close. At this point, Jack again has a choice to make: allow Cohen to live with his sadistic monument, or kill him on the spot. Either way, Atlas then asks Jack to kindly head to Ryan's office and kill him. Just outside, Jack observes Ryan's trophy room of corpses of his would-be assassins on display. Among them is Bill McDonough, his eternal resting place on his former mentor's wall. After completing an EMP bomb he finds abandoned, Jack is able to get past the final security defenses between him and Ryan's office. As Jack reaches the office, Ryan initiates Rapture's self-destruct mechanism, declaring that even if Atlas can take his life, he won't take his city. Inside, Jack stumbles upon Ryan's study, where he discovers all of the evidence Andrew had been collecting on the mysterious invader's true identity. As it turns out, Ryan had literally connected the dots and uncovered the truth about his son's fate. Jack then finally finds the man in his office, calmly golfing on an indoor putting green, separated by a large pane of glass. Andrew Ryan gives his final speech, declaring to Jack that a man chooses, a slave obeys. He then reveals Jack's past, explaining that all of his memories up to him arriving in Rapture were manufactured. Ryan then invites Jack into his quarters and demonstrates the mental programming that is activated by the phrase, "Would you kindly?" Ryan then hands Jack his putter and commands his son to kill him. In his final moments, Andrew Ryan forces Jack to confront the horrifying truth. Despite his apparent freedom, Jack has been a puppet all along, manipulated by Atlas. By making Jack kill him, Ryan finally proves his point about the illusion of free will, as his son plants the putter in his skull, killing him and bringing an end to Ryan's rule over Rapture. Jack then takes a keycard with Ryan's genetic code and inserts it into a giant console, disabling the self-destruct sequence. Atlas then calls Jack to congratulate him, before dropping his ruse and revealing that he and Frank Fontaine had been the same person all along. With Ryan now gone, Fontaine has no reason to hide his identity, and he retakes the Frank Fontaine mantle, resurrecting Fontaine Futuristics to assert control over the city. As Frank deploys security bots to kill Jack, he is suddenly led to safety by a group of little sisters, who react differently to him based on his actions thus far. This leads him back to Tenenbaum's safe house, where the Doctor is able to undo some of Jack's mental programming, allowing him some free will, but not completely free of Fontaine's control. Tenenbaum suggests that Jack finds Suchong in his apartment in order to remove the other programming that even she doesn't know about. While searching for Suchong, Jack learns of an antidote to the mind control plasmid called Lot 192. Jack reaches Suchong's lab, where he discovers more about the Doctor's history with the Little Sisters and Big Daddies, while additionally finding the late Dr. Suchong's corpse, murdered by one of his own experiments. After recovering and administering the antidote, Jack heads to once again take down the tyrannical leader of Rapture, only this time it's Frank Fontaine. When Jack lets Fontaine slip through his fingers, however, he's forced to pretend to be a big daddy in order to get a little sister to open a door for him. After gathering pheromones, a voice modulator, and a diving suit, Jack is able to recruit a little sister who finally leads him right to Fontaine, giving Jack her syringe, telling him to stick it in the bad man. Jack takes an elevator to Fontaine's lair, where he finds the man finally injecting himself with the powerful plasmids he had been saving for his own use. Luckily, Jack has his own ace in the hole, and weakens the hulking mutant of a man by extracting his atom with the little sister's syringe. After a grueling battle, Jack is able to weaken and distract Fontaine enough for the remaining little sisters to arrive and overwhelm him, extracting his atom en masse and sending his body into a massive shock, which ultimately kills the man once known as Frank Fontaine. In the wake of the battle, the events that transpire depend on the actions taken by Jack regarding the Little Sisters throughout his journey through Rapture. If Jack harvested any of the Little Sisters, he becomes the fascist leader his father had always feared, besmirching his ideals even further by obtaining nuclear weapons for Rapture to attack those on the surface. If Jack instead had saved them all, he elects to abandon Rapture, as well as all of the pain he suffered there, and brings the girls to the surface in Fontaine's submarine. On the surface, Jack gives the girls what he never had, their own lives. Decades later, he dies peacefully, surrounded by the adopted women that he once rescued from the depths. In the power vacuum left in the wake of Andrew Ryan and Frank Fontaine's deaths, Dr. Sophia Lamb emerges from Persephone to take whatever control is left of Rapture, instilling a completely opposite ideological viewpoint of a unified Rapture family working for the collective good. She starts recruiting splicers into this family while working with Dr. Gil Alexander on a project to collect and implant massive doses of Atom, hoping to imbue the subject with the collective genius of those the Atom was harvested from. When this experiment goes horribly wrong and severely mutates both the body and mind of its first subject, Dr. Gil Alexander himself, Sophia determines that there must be a better method. She then determines that the only person who could handle the amount of Adam needed to create the utopian of her dreams would have to be someone whose body was adapted to the substance, someone like a little sister. Needing more and more Adam for this experiment, but finding that the little sisters once used for the task are growing too old for the gathering, Sophia comes up with a plan to increase her supply. Using Alexander's methods, these girls are given their own conditioning and diving suits, as well as a new title, Big Sisters. Lamb then sends the Big Sisters to the surface to covertly abduct and return with candidates for a new generation of little sisters. In 1968, a decade after his death, Subject Delta is revived inside of a Vita chamber, a Sinclair and Suchong developed resurrection machine that Jack may have used during his journey if he found himself unlucky. When he awakens inside of Rapture, Delta immediately begins to search for Eleanor. He receives a call from Tenenbaum, who had assisted Eleanor in reviving him, and she has him meet her at a train station. While Delta is forced to deal with the Big Sisters, as well as splicers sent by Sophia Lamb, his diving suit and powerful conditioning protect him from the dangers of the Big Sisters, as well as the ocean around the collapsing Rapture architecture. Delta soon finds Tenenbaum at the train station, who informs the Big Daddy about his origins and purpose. Tenenbaum tells him that she has returned to Rapture to save the little girls Lamb is trying to use for her plot. As Lamb sics more splicers on the train station, Tenenbaum is forced to rush off with the girls she rescued while Delta fights them off. Afterward, Tenenbaum says her goodbyes to Delta, telling him to search for Eleanor in Fontaine Futuristics with the help of Augustus Sinclair. Sinclair calls Delta and leads him to the frozen-over railways to Fontaine Futuristics, informing him of an incinerate plasmid in the nearby amusement park that will let him thaw it. After collecting Adam from another little sister he protects and having his own choice of rescuing or harvesting her, Delta is able to obtain the incinerate plasmid. After killing a Big Sister hoping to take his Adam, Delta gets back to the frozen path and melts the ice blocking the train to board it with Sinclair. Their trip is stopped short by Lamb, who initiates a city-wide lockdown. Sinclair then tells Delta to find the local governor, Grace Holloway, to get an override key. When he finds Holloway, Eleanor's former caretaker, who Delta had previously assaulted to protect his little sister, Delta grabs the key and is given the choice to either kill or spare the vengeful governor. Either way, Delta returns back to the train and continues his trip with Sinclair. However, they're soon stopped once again, this time by Rapture architect Simon Wales, now a preacher in Lamb's family. Father Wales fires a torpedo at the train, knocking Delta off, separating him from Sinclair, and causing an explosion that begins to flood the area. Delta heads to a pumping station to drain the water in Dionysus Park, where the pair can secure another train car. Delta fights through and kills the splicer Father Wales before draining the park and rushing there to regroup with Sinclair. However, there's one more blockage that pops up. The train car that Sinclair finds is locked down. Delta is then called by former reporter Stanley Poole, who offers him a deal to shut down the security protocol in exchange for clearing the park of the Little Sisters that have arrived to gather the Atom after the water was drained. After completing this task by rescuing or harvesting the Little Sisters in the area, Poole informs Delta of his history as Johnny Topside and how he became a Big Daddy. Through his bond with Eleanor, he also discovers Stanley's abduction and sale of the girl. After deciding Stanley's fate, life or death once again, Delta returns to the now activated train car and finally arrives at Fontaine Futuristics. Inside, Delta finds recordings from Gil Alexander in his last moments of lucidity before his massive doses of Adam completely mutated him. In the messages, Alexander leaves instructions for how to deal with his mutated self. Delta also has to deal with this currently mutated version of Gil, who refers to himself as Alex the Great and communicates via the security systems. Surviving Alex the Great's defenses, Delta finds the laboratory where the giant mutated doctor is now residing in a massive incubator. Once again, Delta can choose whether to leave him alive or put the giant, mutated scientist out of his misery. Using a key with Gil's genetic code, Delta is finally able to enter Persephone, where he quickly finds Eleanor locked in a quarantine cell with her mother sitting beside her. Delta fights off Big Sister sent by Sophia to stop him before he is finally able to enter the cell to rejoin his little sister. As he approaches, Sophia tells Delta that Eleanor, missing her father, was behind having him revived, and she has been watching his every move since. Now seeing Eleanor as a monster influenced by Delta, Sophia begins to smother her daughter with a pillow, knowing that if the little sister's heart stops, her bonded Big Daddy will fall into a coma. While Delta tries to stop Sophia, Eleanor suffocates and her heart stops long enough for him to fall unconscious, severing the bond between the two. When Delta awakens, he finds himself strapped to a bed, and Eleanor sends a little sister to assist him. The little sister injects Delta with a plasmid that allows him to control her, seeing Rapture through one of their eyes. Using his host's small stature, Delta is able to sneak into Lamb's office to release the cell locks before collecting Big Sister armor and weaponry for Eleanor. After delivering the equipment, Eleanor dons it and escapes her cell, returning to Delta's actual body to free him. Sophia watches and realizes that the surface is no place for monsters like them, intending on blowing up Persephone to bury them all together under the sea. The pair rush to Sinclair's escape lifeboat, finding Augustus suspiciously missing. After Sophia activates another security lockdown, Delta finds what happened to Sinclair when Lamb introduces him in his new form, a Big Daddy whose mind is controlled by Lamb. While Sinclair tries to fight her influence, he knows that his only escape is for Delta to put him out of his misery. Delta mercifully kills Sinclair, taking the override key from him as Augustus thanks his new friend with his final breath. Afterwards, Eleanor has Delta free the remaining little sisters so they can collectively use their power to boil away water that has filled the lifeboat, so it can float to the surface. He does so and returns to Eleanor at the lifeboat, where she enters the ballast tank with the little sisters. In one final battle with the remaining members of Sophia's Rapture family, Delta protects Eleanor while she boils the water. Once it's gone, the pair flood the docking platform to launch the lifeboat, racing to it as it begins to float. Unfortunately, the pair run right into an explosive trap left by Sophia. While Eleanor is able to escape at the last second using a plasmid, Delta is caught in the blast and is unable to reach the lifeboat as it launches. Delta is blown into the ocean and grabs onto the lifeboat's exterior, watching Sophia and Eleanor inside through a window. It's at this point several different outcomes can occur based on the actions Delta took after his revival. If Delta's good actions inspired Eleanor to show her mother mercy, she saves her from drowning and takes her to the surface. Otherwise, she simply allows her mother to die. Similarly, Delta's fate is determined by his own decisions. While he's left mortally wounded by the explosion, if Delta had harvested the little sisters he encountered along his journey, then Eleanor either steals his atom and becomes a powerful, vengeful monster emerging into the surface world, or Delta decides to sacrifice himself and not allow her to take his atom, giving the young woman a chance to make her own path forward. If he had instead rescued the little sisters he encountered, Eleanor extracts his memories and essence through his atom, allowing them to be together forevermore. One of the rescued little sisters then hands Eleanor a doll she had made of Subject Delta, which she then drops into the water, leaving the underwater city of Rapture behind for good. At some point during Subject Delta's journey, another Big Daddy, Subject Sigma, approaches Minerva's den, a lockdown section of Rapture that once housed its most advanced technological achievements, including a highly intelligent supercomputer called the Thinker. As Sigma approaches, however, he is stopped by Reed Wall, one of the Thinker's co-inventors, who triggers an explosion to protect his invention. When Sigma awakens on the ocean floor, he receives a radio signal from Charles Milton Porter, the Thinker's other co-inventor. Porter tells Sigma that he was awoken by Tenenbaum, who can help them get the Thinker out of Rapture. Following Porter's instructions to rescue his invention from his former partner, who has now gone mad from splicing, Sigma makes his way into the old Rapture Central Computing headquarters to find Porter's office. Once inside, Porter has Sigma take a keycard that will get him to the computer core where he can print a hard copy of the Thinker's machine code. After reprogramming a signal beacon that will allow them safe exit in Porter's bathysphere, Sigma arrives at the Thinker's computer core. As he gets closer, Sigma begins to get signs that something isn't right with Porter. Wall tells Sigma that Porter was taken by Ryan's secret police years ago, and the Big Daddy soon finds a recording from CM Porter himself confirming that fact. In the recording, Porter notes that he's heard of those Ryan takes becoming Big Daddies, but he focuses on the task at hand, the Rapture Departure Protocol, which is a plan he programs into the Thinker to escape Rapture and live on no matter what happens to Porter himself. Inside the core, Sigma uses the code printer. Finally finished with his mission, Sigma awaits the printout. Until Wall arrives and shuts the Thinker down, stopping the print. Wall taunts Sigma before running off, leaving the building collapsing in his wake. Tenenbaum finally calls Sigma herself, telling him that he must stop Wall and bring the Thinker back online in order to keep Minerva's den from falling to pieces. After a rough battle, Sigma kills Reed Wall, taking the administrator punch card from his body so he can reactivate the Thinker. After Sigma inserts the card, the Thinker scans his genetic code, recognizing him as Big Daddy Alpha Series subject Sigma. The Thinker then announces the Big Daddy's identity before he was transformed, revealing that subject Sigma had been none other than Charles Milton Porter all along. Tenenbaum then calls again and tells Porter that he had been speaking to the Thinker all along. Before he was captured, the pair worked together on a plan to get the Thinker out of Rapture so they could use its abilities to finally find a cure for Adam's sickness. They chose for it to speak in Porter's own voice because it would subconsciously be familiar to him, and he would know to trust it. Porter retrieves the printout of the Thinker's code and takes it to his bathysphere, passing through his old study. There, Porter finds an old recording of himself trying to recreate his late wife Pearl's personality through the Thinker so he could speak with her once again. Porter then joins Tenenbaum in the bathysphere, and the pair ascend to the surface, where they have much work to do. Sometime much later, we find Charles Milton Porter, now restored back to his former self with the Thinker's help, and he visits the cemetery on the surface where his wife was buried. He leaves her a letter as he finally says his goodbyes and walks away towards an unknown future. This brings us to the end of Rapture's storyline, at least as it was left all the way back in 2010. As we all know, however, there's still a lot more story to cover, while our next story takes us not only to a new city, but also a new time. Now, let us go from the depths of the ocean below to the clouds in the skies above. Our story begins in the 1890s, shortly after the events of the Wounded Knee Massacre in South Dakota, where we find United States Army soldier Booker DeWitt. While DeWitt participated in the event and is seen as a hero among his fellow soldiers, he is quickly overwhelmed by the guilt of his actions. DeWitt soon comes across a preacher named Whitting, who offers to wash away his sins in the waters of baptism. While the personal significance of this decision is lost on the guilt-ridden Booker DeWitt, even he couldn't possibly imagine the ramifications of the choice he is given. At this exact moment, two parallel timelines emerge, one where Booker declines the baptism and one where he accepts it. In the timeline where Booker accepts the baptism, he devotes his life to Christianity, abandoning the Booker DeWitt name and rechristening himself Zachary Hale Comstock. He soon meets a physicist named Rosalind Lutece, who had discovered quantum particles that could be suspended in spacetime at a fixed height. Named after their discoverer, Comstock works with Rosalind to use these Lutece particles to build a floating city that he had supposedly seen in a prophecy. During her research, Rosalind is able to communicate with a male version of herself from a parallel reality, Robert, through the Lutece field using Morse code. The twins then work together to develop a device that facilitates the ripping open of tears in the fabric of reality, allowing glimpses into, and eventually access to, parallel universes. The collaboration between the Lutece twins allows Comstock's vision of a city suspended in the clouds to become a reality. This city, called Columbia, is launched in 1893 at that year's Chicago World's Fair. Supported fully by the United States, Columbia begins to travel the world as a monument of American exceptionalism. Comstock envisions Columbia as his Ark, or the New Eden, a sanctuary that preserves the purity and ideals of America as he perceives them. Comstock's beliefs are also deeply rooted in nationalism and white supremacy, leading to his founding of a political party called the Founders. Columbia begins to thrive, thanks in great part to the interdimensional tears utilized by the Lutece twins. Comstock looks through the tears to see visions of other realities, including potential future outcomes. He quickly gains the reputation of a prophet and is worshipped by a large number of Columbia's inhabitants. Comstock shares this technology with businessman and inventor Jeremiah Fink, who begins to bring technologies from other universes to quickly advance the state of Columbia. One of these universes, so it happens, contains Rapture, and Fink collaborates with that universe's Dr. Yi Su Chong. Fink is able to create plasmid-like elixirs called vigors, which grant their users supernatural abilities without the nasty splicer side effects. Comstock soon sees a vision of Columbia, under the divine guidance of his heir, raining destruction upon New York City in the year 1984. He interprets this vision as a sign that the only way for Columbia to prosper is if it is led by someone of his bloodline. Unfortunately, Zachary and his wife, Lady Annabelle Comstock, are unable to have a child due to Comstock's repeated overexposure to the Lutece fields. Driven by his obsession with securing a pure and divine legacy, Comstock demands a solution from the Luteces. Using their abilities to access parallel realities, the twins devise a plan to bring a child from an alternate universe. This brings us back to one of the timelines where Booker DeWitt refused the baptism. In that timeline, Booker continued to live a life of guilt and hardship, joining the Pinkerton National Detective Agency and employing increasingly violent methods. The one bright spot in his life, his wife Annabelle, dies while giving birth to their daughter, Anna. This drives Booker further into a dark depression, leaving his job and spiraling into alcoholism and reckless gambling. Comstock, desperate and ruthless, arranges for Booker to relinquish his daughter in exchange for clearing his gambling debts. Distraught and deep in self-loathing, Booker agrees. The Luteces then create a tear in reality through which Comstock can take Anna. During the exchange, as Anna is pulled through the tear, Booker tries to take his daughter back from Comstock. During the struggle, the portal closes on her, severing the tip of the baby's little finger. This traumatic event leaves her existing within two distinct realities, imbuing in her a natural ability to create and manipulate tears herself. Anna, now renamed Elizabeth, is then taken to Columbia. Booker, meanwhile, brands his own hand with his daughter's initials, AD, so that he may never forget the sin he committed. This proves to not be enough, as the combination of his trauma, interaction with the tears, and subsequent alcohol abuse causes his memories to fog. Over the next years, Comstock continues his overuse of the Lutece's technology, giving him cancer and causing him to rapidly age. Soon, he sees a vision through a tear of Booker somehow arriving in his universe to take Elizabeth back. Comstock begins to preach to his congregation about a false shepherd who will arrive to tempt Elizabeth. Meanwhile, Lady Comstock grows more and more troubled over the situation involving Elizabeth. At the lady's request, Elizabeth is raised outside of their home without any knowledge of her adoptive parents' identities. Zachary then has a tower built on Monument Island to be his daughter's gilded cage. To protect her, Jeremiah Fink creates Songbird, a massive flying fusion of man and machine inspired by the Big Daddy and his collaboration with Suchong. While Comstock unsuccessfully tries to imbue his beliefs on Elizabeth, she educates herself extensively through the books and materials she finds in her tower. After an incident where Elizabeth saves Songbird's life, the pair become bonded just as Songbird's inspirations did with their own little sisters. While Songbird acts as Elizabeth's protector, he doubles as her jailer, keeping her from leaving the tower. Comstock also installs a group of devices in the tower to siphon Elizabeth's powers to limit her from creating new tears to wherever she went, allowing her only to open existing ones. In 1895, Zachary learns that his wife is preparing to reveal the truth behind Elizabeth's existence. He has her killed, framing their housekeeper Daisy Fitzroy for the murder. Fitzroy is able to elude capture, and she takes refuge in Finkton, Columbia's work district. There, she establishes the militant underground resistance group Vox Populi, which stands directly against Comstock's racist and xenophobic views. In 1901, Columbia, now floating over China, acts without orders from the US military to intervene in the Boxer Rebellion, in which American hostages were taken. Hoping to stand up for America, Comstock uses Columbia's highly advanced weapons to destroy the city of Peking. The United States denounces this decision, recalling Columbia back to America. Comstock defies this order, instead seceding from the Union on July 6, 1902, before the city disappears into the clouds. In 1909, after over a decade of Vox Populi warring with Columbia's law enforcement, Daisy Fitzroy is captured after a mole within her group tips off the police. Fitzroy is then taken to Comstock House Re-Education Center, a research facility where she is to be interviewed and psychoanalyzed by psychologist Dr. Francis Pinchot. Dr. Pinchot begins a series of interviews with Daisy under the supervision of his superior, Dr. Kittery. Despite a rocky start, Fitzroy and Pinchot reach an agreement where they begin to share their own personal histories. As their sessions progress, Dr. Kittery suggests more invasive methods, such as phrenology and even lobotomy, but Pinchot continues his interviews, intrigued by Fitzroy's intellect. During their third interview, tensions flare when Fitzroy's critical responses lead Pinchot to slap her, revealing his true nature. Later, after Fitzroy scores a genius level 149 on Pinchot's IQ test, he begins to listen to her philosophy, reading her manifesto, The People's Voice, and beginning to reconsider his beliefs. On May 13, 1909, Dr. Pinchot faces a moral crossroads when he's asked by Fitzroy to aid in her escape from Comstock House, which is quickly turning into a torture facility. Choosing to help her, Pinchot promises to protect Fitzroy, admitting a grudging admiration for her mind despite his own racial prejudices. However, as Fitzroy's rescue unfolds, she shockingly betrays Pinchot, shooting him dead despite his assistance and change of heart. Seeing him as just another snake, Fitzroy escapes the facility and rejoins her Vox Populi comrades. Using their machine, the Lutece twins soon see a tear depicting Elizabeth using her unique abilities to fulfill Comstock's prophecy of destroying New York City. Robert then coerces his sister to assist him in sending Elizabeth back to her home universe to prevent this dire fate. Comstock learns of this plan, however, and has Jeremiah Fink sabotage their machine. This causes the machine to malfunction, and they're presumed dead when their bodies disappear after a failed experiment. In actuality, this event doesn't kill the Luteces, but instead spreads them out across all of time and space, giving them the ability to exist and materialize in any universe at any time. Unsatisfied with how things were left in Columbia, Robert convinces Rosalind once again to assist him in getting Booker to the city to reclaim his daughter. They attempt this plan 122 times, repeating the cycle of bringing him to Columbia while Booker is never successful. Despite this, the Luteces continue their efforts, starting one more attempt. In 1912, Booker DeWitt, now a private investigator in his timeline, is hired by the Lutece twins to return a young woman back to New York safely, with only a photograph, her name, and no other information regarding her identity. Unknowingly to him, they take Booker through a tear into the reality where Columbia exists. The twins then row Booker to a lighthouse off the coast of Maine, leaving him only with a case of instructions and a weapon before rowing back to the shore, leaving him alone to begin his journey. Booker climbs the lighthouse, finding its former keeper murdered inside. Per his instructions, Booker activates the lighthouse, stepping inside a pod that shoots into the sky. As Booker passes the clouds, he gazes upon the wonder of the city in the sky as he descends towards the floating Columbia. The pod lands and Booker emerges in Columbia's church, hearing preacher Whitting speaking of the founders. Whitting then baptizes Booker in the name of their prophet, and while he's held underwater, Booker sees a vision of the timeline where Comstock destroys New York City. Booker regains consciousness in the Garden of New Eden, among statues of the founding fathers. Booker then explores Columbia, finding it amidst a celebration of the 10-year anniversary of its secession. On his way to Monument Island to look for Elizabeth, Booker receives a telegram from the Luteces, telling him not to pick number 77. They also show up in the flesh, telling him to flip a coin, which has been heads every time prior. Once again, Booker flips heads, and when he's offered to pick a baseball in a nearby gathering, he picks a ball marked number 77, not giving much hope to this cycle being the successful one. Booker soon sees what this baseball is for, when Jeremiah Fink reveals what the lucky winner, which happens to be number 77, gets to do: throw the baseball at an interracial couple. Before Booker can decide whether to throw it at the couple or at Fink, he's stopped by Columbia police agents who recognize him as the false shepherd. Booker breaks free, stealing one of their sky hooks that allow him to use the city's railway systems to traverse. Booker fights through the Founders' forces using various vigors he finds to gain his own supernatural abilities to take them on. As Booker makes his way to Monument Island, he receives a direct message from Zachary Hale Comstock, who warns him that not all debts can be paid. Booker is able to board Comstock's Zeppelin to take to the island, but the prophet shows up himself, commanding one of his followers to set herself aflame. Booker is then forced to escape the fiery Zeppelin just before it explodes, narrowly making it onto Monument Island. There, Booker finds the tower, observing Elizabeth inside as she opens tears and otherwise lives her normal life. Watching her, Booker learns that Elizabeth has an affinity for Paris, France. Soon, Booker crashes into Elizabeth's living quarters and introduces himself to the startled young woman. At this point, both father and daughter are unaware of each other's true identity, as well as their relationship to one another. Suddenly, Songbird senses danger and rushes to Elizabeth's aid. Frantically attacking the tower to get to his bonded protectee, Songbird damages it, causing it to fall as Elizabeth and Booker make a daring escape. During their ensuing skyhook ride, however, the attack from the massive flying Songbird causes them to fall into Battleship Bay, an artificial floating body of water. Knocked out, Booker dreams of the deal he made with the Luteces, starting to put the pieces of his foggy memory back together. Washing up on the beach, Booker finds Elizabeth dancing on a pier. Booker spots the First Lady airship flying nearby and lies to Elizabeth, telling her it's going to Paris. The excited woman runs off with him, and the pair soon find the Lutece twins, who ask Elizabeth to pick a brooch. She then turns the decision over to Booker, who can decide between one adorned with a cage and another with a bird. Despite which Booker picks, the pair move on, with Elizabeth displaying her ability to pick locks so they can get around a police blockade. While trying to board the airship, the pair are ambushed, forcing Booker and Elizabeth to fight off Comstock's followers. As Elizabeth watches Booker kill their attackers, however, she rushes off in fear and anger. Booker then finds her in the gondola to Soldier's Field, where he tries to calm her down. The pair then come to a shaky agreement, and Elizabeth patches Booker up before they continue on. They soon find that they'll need a particular vigor, shock jockey, to get the gondola to the airship moving, and they head to the nearby Hall of Heroes, where it's exclusively carried. While the museum is closed for Columbia Day, the pair get inside, with Elizabeth revealing her ability to open tears to Booker on the way. Booker and Elizabeth find that the hall has already been overrun by Cornelius Slate, a Comstock dissenter and fellow squadmate of Booker DeWitt during Wounded Knee, who's leading a small fringe army. The pair are forced to fight their way through exhibits dedicated to Comstock's history, including Wounded Knee and Peking. During their exploration, the pair see an exhibit that suggests that Elizabeth is Comstock's daughter, the Lamb. Booker eventually reaches Slate, taking the shock jockey from him, leaving him with yet another choice of whether to kill Slate or simply leave him behind. With the electrical vigor in hand, the pair return to the gondola and power it up, finally boarding it to ride up to the First Lady airship. The pair get inside, and Booker punches in the coordinates to their destination. It doesn't take long for the astute Elizabeth to realize that the coordinates are not to Paris, but instead to New York. The betrayed Elizabeth grabs a pipe wrench and swings it at Booker, knocking him unconscious yet again. While he's out, Elizabeth tries to reroute the airship, but they're stopped by Vox Populi. While Elizabeth is able to sneak away, Booker is captured as their leader, Daisy Fitzroy, arrives to take over the airship. Daisy introduces herself and asks Booker to join their cause, before giving him information about a gunsmith in Finkton who can supply them. Fitzroy promises that if Booker retrieves their guns for them, they'll give him the airship back. Fitzroy drops him in Finkton, and Booker soon finds Elizabeth, who immediately runs from him. As he pursues her, Booker is attacked by a massive half-man, half-machine adversary called a Handyman. Elizabeth reluctantly rescues Booker, and despite her still being angry at his betrayal, she agrees to help him get the airship back so long as she can use it to get to Paris. Working together again, the pair enter Finkton, but they find the gunsmith, Chen Li, missing, with signs of a struggle. They find his wife, May, who claims that the founders arrested him and took him to the Good Time Club. Booker and Elizabeth arrive at the Good Time Club, and when they enter, they're greeted over the intercom by Jeremiah Fink. Fink then evaluates Booker for a job as head of security, testing him by sending in waves of enemies and other applicants to fight. After he emerges victorious, Booker is offered the job, but he declines, angering Fink. The pair then reach Chen Li's cell, but unfortunately too late, as they find him beaten to death by his interrogators. Suddenly, the Luteces appear before them and suggest the possibility of another universe where Chen Li isn't dead. Elizabeth then opens a tear and enters with Booker, where they find that in this reality, the soldiers Booker killed in the other one can remember their deaths. Back at the gunsmith's hideout, they find him living a completely different life. However, the man's tools were taken by the police, forcing Booker and Elizabeth to retrieve them so they can obtain guns for the Vox Populi. The two find the tools, and Elizabeth is able to open another tear there to another universe where they're back at the shop. They enter the tear and find a revolution between the Vox and Fink currently underway. Strangely, Booker soon learns that in this universe, he had died as a martyr for the Vox Populi. As the memories begin to bleed over, Booker's nose also begins to bleed. The two go to Chenlin's shop, finding both the gunsmith and his wife shot dead in this universe. The pair go back to reclaim the airship, fighting heavy opposition on the way. While Elizabeth feels responsible for the deaths of the Lins in this reality, Booker is contacted by Daisy Fitzroy. This universe's Fitzroy is angered by Booker's arrival, as she sees it as an affront to the sacrifice her Booker DeWitt made for the cause. The pair soon see Fitzroy just as she shoots Jeremiah Fink dead on the other side of a pane of glass. After wiping her face with his blood, Fitzroy commands the Vox to kill the imposters. Fighting through the revolutionary forces as well now, Booker and Elizabeth see Daisy inside of the locked glass room, now holding a gun to Fisk's young son's head. Booker boosts Elizabeth up to a vent so she can enter the room, while he distracts Daisy. Fitzroy claims that in order to get rid of the weed, she has to pull it out from the root, forcing Elizabeth to stab the leader of the Vox Populi, saving the young Fink, but killing Daisy Fitzroy. A shaken Elizabeth runs off to the First Lady airship, locking herself in her mother's bedroom while Booker plots a course. Shortly after the ship begins to move, Elizabeth emerges from the bedroom with a freshly cut shorter hairstyle and a change of clothes she found in Lady Comstock's wardrobe. Elizabeth asks Booker how he washes away the bad things he's done, and he simply responds that you don't. You just learn to live with it. As the pair decide whether to go to Paris or to New York, Songbird catches wind of their location and hones in on them. While they try to escape, Songbird brings the airship crashing down. Booker and Elizabeth emerge from the wreckage to find the Luteces, who suggest that they can subdue the Songbird by finding an instrument and melody to play from its creator, Comstock. The pair head to Comstock House, finding a train station on the way overrun by Vox Populi, with the scalps of several important founders on display. As they take a gondola up to the Port Prosperity District, Elizabeth realizes who the Lutece twins are, informing Booker of their research into the floating particles. Once they reach their destination, Songbird soon tracks them down, forcing them to hide from him. As they press on, Elizabeth forces Booker to promise that if he can't stop Comstock and Songbird, he'll at least make sure they can't take her back, by any means necessary. The pair arrive at the house, and its security systems believe Elizabeth to be Lady Comstock due to her dress, despite the lady's inconvenient death years prior. Finding that they need her mother's fingerprints, Elizabeth decides to pay her respects and visit Lady Comstock's grave. Luckily, Zachary kept his wife's body in an airtight container, preventing her decomposition. As they attempt to open her coffin, however, Comstock stops them and unleashes another machine that begins to siphon Elizabeth's powers to open a tear, bringing forth some sort of ghostly apparition of Lady Comstock out of it. Booker and Elizabeth are then forced to fight the ghost of her mother, who has the ability to raise the dead. After the battle, the pair follow footsteps left behind by the Spectre to 3 different tears. Through these tears and recordings nearby, the two learn that Elizabeth was not born of Zachary and Lady Comstock, although the latter accused Rosalind Lutece of having an affair and birthing the child. While Elizabeth doesn't learn her true origins yet, she knows that Comstock and Annabelle are not her parents. With this knowledge, she forgives her mother for abandoning her, knowing they're both just victims of Comstock. The siren of Lady Comstock is then let free, and she blasts open the door to Comstock's house, finally welcoming Elizabeth into their home. As the pair reach the ride up to Comstock House, Songbird arrives and attacks, throwing Booker into the station and knocking him out once again. Booker dreams of the Luteces telling him to bring them the girl and wipe away the debt, and Booker awakens to find Elizabeth trying to stop Songbird from attacking him. Elizabeth agrees to go back home with Songbird to save Booker, and Songbird grabs her before flying off, leaving Booker alive to chase after them. Booker soon finds himself in the middle of a snowfall, realizing it is now somehow 6 months later. He sees closing tears and enters Comstock House to find a monument to Elizabeth. Through the tears, Booker hears memories of Dr. P. Pettifog at Comstock House, who implanted Elizabeth with a device to control her mind and siphon her powers to keep her on a tight leash. He also hears how Comstock broke Elizabeth down, convincing her that Booker had abandoned her after leading her astray. Despite the disturbing revelations from the tears and other recordings, Booker finds the Security Council and unlocks Elizabeth's holding cell. On his way to her, he encounters the Luteces once again, When he finally reaches Elizabeth's cell, he finds that she has somehow aged into an old woman. This future Elizabeth helps Booker to a ledge where he can see New York City being attacked by Columbia in 1984. Elizabeth explains that she had realized too late that she was causing the future the Luteces were trying to avoid. She gives Booker a message for her younger self, advising her to not become me. This future Elizabeth then sends Booker back through a tear, where he reaches the operating theater where the younger Elizabeth is being held. DeWitt fights to the controls that operate the machines holding Elizabeth down and shuts them off. Now freed, the woman is able to open a tear to a rural field where a tornado is currently raging through. The doctors are swallowed by the tornado as Elizabeth closes it on them, leaving her alone. Booker races to Elizabeth and saves her, removing the apparatus from her while giving her the letter from her older self. Now knowing that Comstock turns her into the monster that destroys New York, she vows not to leave Columbia until she can stop him, even if it means killing him. Booker tells Elizabeth that he can't let her kill Comstock, because he's going to do it first. The pair then find Comstock's flagship, the Hand of the Prophet, and they surmise that he must be on board. Fighting through the Founder's greatest defenses, Booker and Elizabeth take an airship to the flagship. The pair fight to the top deck, finding a model of Elizabeth's tower, learning of the siphons installed to limit her abilities. Elizabeth then enters Comstock's chambers, and Booker follows closely behind. Elizabeth walks up to her father, standing beside a baptismal font. Comstock then reveals that Booker has been hiding something from her, and violently grabs at the woman's hand to confront him about her severed finger. Booker then grabs Comstock to protect Elizabeth, slamming his head into the font. Comstock simply says it is finished before Booker drowns him in the baptismal water. Booker denies knowing about Elizabeth's finger, but his nose starts to bleed. Elizabeth cryptically tells him that he does know, he just doesn't remember. Booker, still denying everything, declares that they've got to bring down the tower to destroy the siphons so Elizabeth can open a tear to the truth. As Booker pilots the giant Zeppelin back to the tower, Vox Populi ships arrive and attempt to board. Elizabeth realizes at that moment that part of the note she left herself, a cage, wasn't referring to the word, but rather to a sequence of music notes. She then breaks open one of the devices that alerts Songbird to retrieve a whistler instrument, which she plays the melody on just as Songbird arrives, pacifying it and allowing her to command it. With Songbird's help, Booker and Elizabeth fight off the Vox Populi forces in a massive battle. Afterwards, Elizabeth and Booker look upon her tower from the deck of the ship. She hands him the whistler, and he plays the melody, commanding Songbird to bring down the tower. In the ensuing blast, Booker drops the whistler, losing his control over Songbird, causing the beast to dash towards them, ready to attack. With an overwhelming amount of power now available to her, Elizabeth creates a new tear, taking them to a familiar city deep in the depths of the sea. Songbird crashes into a pane of glass separating the city from the surrounding waters, and the pressure of the sea around him kills Elizabeth's protector, as the two say their goodbyes through the glass. Booker soon finds that he's in an underwater city called Rapture, and the pair take a bathysphere back up to the surface, where they see the lighthouse entrance. Elizabeth looks to the stars in the night sky and marvels at the thousands of doors opening all at once that she sees in them. When the pair reach the lighthouse, they're able to open the door, but when they enter, they find an infinite sea of lighthouses on the other side. Elizabeth begins to understand their place in the multiverse, telling Booker that there's always a lighthouse, there's always a man, there's always a city. Elizabeth is then able to see all of the possible universes at once, their doors all open to her. She notes the similarities and differences, constants and variables. She then shows Booker all of the versions of them, with every decision to every choice happening simultaneously, now, in the past, and in the future. All of these paths lead to the same place, however, where it all started. Booker then opens the door to another lighthouse, much like the one that brought him to Columbia. On the other side, he finds himself back at his baptism, once again before Preacher Whitting, with the decision to wash away his sins. Initially, Booker takes the preacher's hand, but stops the baptism as it's occurring, knowing no water can wash away his sins. Elizabeth takes Booker through another door, where he relives Robert Lutece requesting the girl to wipe away his debt. While Booker believes that this is the moment Lutece hired him to find Elizabeth, she quickly reveals to him that it was actually when he sold his daughter. Booker is still in disbelief, denying that he ever even had a baby. As his nose bleeds more, Elizabeth takes him back on the boat, rowing to the lighthouse with the Luteces. While Booker believes their work is done since he's killed Comstock, Elizabeth reminds him that he still exists in an infinite number of other worlds. After Booker is forced to relive the moment where he failed to stop Comstock from taking his daughter, he's brought back to the coast of Maine with the Luteces. Booker is taken to the boat once again, but this time his mind adapts, and he puts together the totality of the truth. Still not knowing his adversary's true identity, Booker then determines that the only way to stop himself from selling his daughter in the first place is to kill Comstock, specifically at the moment he was born. Booker then enters the lighthouse doors once again to find himself at the scene of his own baptism. Suddenly, Booker turns to look at Elizabeth, as other versions of herself from other realities arrive beside her. The Elizabeths then tell Booker that while he walked away from the baptism, in other worlds, he didn't, which led to the creation of infinite Comstocks across infinite times. To prevent this, the Elizabeths then smother him in the crib, drowning Booker before he can even make the decision to become Comstock or not. As Booker's life fades away, so too do the ensemble of Elizabeths, as the possibilities of them being created disappear with their father. We then see a scene taking place on October 8th, 1893, in a universe that we don't know. In it, Booker DeWitt, private investigator, calls out to his daughter Anna. He then enters her room, looks in her crib, and the screen fades to black, leaving us to wonder at the infinite possibilities. While this brings us to the end of Booker DeWitt and Elizabeth's possible stories, before the erasure of their existence from the multiverse, there was another story to tell, one that takes place in one of infinite possible universes. This story takes us to the undersea city of Rapture on December 31st, 1958, New Year's Eve. There, we find a rundown private investigator named Booker DeWitt, who is awoken by a potential client, a woman named Elizabeth. Elizabeth offers him a job to find an orphaned girl named Sally, who's gone missing after the closure of Fontaine's Charities. Booker recognizes the girl, but states that she's already dead. Elizabeth simply states that Lost isn't dead, before she exits Booker's office out into the neon-filled underwater city. Booker follows, trying to learn more about Elizabeth's relationship to Sally, but the woman keeps her information close to the vest. As they walk, Elizabeth is shocked to see a group of little sisters, unaware of their existence. Booker asks why she's never seen them before, to which she simply replies that she doesn't get out much. Once the two are alone again, Elizabeth reveals that she knows that Booker had found Sally and took her in, but eventually lost her when she was abducted while he was gambling at the Surprise Casino. Booker tells her that a cop friend of his, Sullivan, later told him that her body was found floating in the docks. Elizabeth then asks if Booker ever saw the body for himself, revealing that Sally very likely could have been sold, with her death being faked for convenience. Elizabeth takes Booker to her source, Sander Cohen, who is residing at his club, appropriately named Cohen. They soon learn that a private event is currently underway, and only those artisans who have been given invitation masks can enter. The pair then begin to search the stores that are sponsoring the event to try to obtain a mask. Eventually, the pair are able to steal one of the masks and gain entry to Cohen's club. Inside the man's lavish establishment, they find the artist in another one of his sick processes of creation, electrocuting 2 dancing partners to death after failing to inspire his muse. They ask Cohen what he knows about Sally, but he only agrees to answer if they dance for his inspiration. Booker and Elizabeth reluctantly agree and begin to dance together for Sander. During their dance, the two determine that the only 2 people who would have the funds to participate in selling children would be Ryan or Sue Chong. But Booker claims that if Sue Chong had Sally, he would know it, since he had tortured the doctor for 15 hours questioning him. Suddenly, Cohen grows furious and electrocutes Elizabeth and Booker, knocking them unconscious. When Booker awakens, he finds himself with Elizabeth, and Cohen sets them free to search for Sally, warning them that they might not like what they find. The pair find themselves in an elevator going down below the trenches, where they see what remains of Fontaine's department store, sunk by Ryan after Frank's supposed death. Cohen leaves them with one final hint that they'll find Sally in the housewares department, and the pair enter the dilapidated building. After finding what Elizabeth knows as a skyhook, but Booker calls an air grabber, something she points out as constants and variables, the pair fight their way to the housewares department. Unfortunately, the pair soon find that they're blocked by needing particular plasmids, which in this universe have experimental drinkable forms thanks to the tears between Rapture and Columbia, and definitely not because it was easier and cheaper to just reuse the same animations from the base game in the DLC. Eventually, they obtain them and take a tram to reach their destination. There, the pair begin to search for Sally in the vents the little sisters use. Elizabeth gets the idea to raise the heat levels to smoke her out. After closing the vents and leaving only one exhaust open, Booker and Elizabeth still find no sign of the girl. They're forced to turn up the heat, and she eventually pokes her head out of the vent. Booker then grabs her, seeing her current little sister form. Suddenly, Elizabeth shouts to warn Booker, and he turns around to see Sally's big daddy, firing a drill at him. Booker dodges the attack and eliminates the big daddy, returning to the vent to rescue Sally afterwards. While Sally doesn't recognize Booker in her current state, she does recognize the head of her favorite doll, Sarah, which he presents to her. As Booker tries to forcefully pull Sally from the vent, his memories of Comstock fighting to obtain Elizabeth seep back into his mind. Only this time, the baby's head is caught in the portal's closure. Booker then remembers his lifetime as Comstock, and Elizabeth reveals that in this universe, after the baby girl had died as he tried to obtain her, he consulted the Luteces to take him to a universe where he could forget. This led him to Rapture, but he only created another similar situation by putting Sally in danger. Booker then tries to apologize to Elizabeth for all that he's done, but she simply replies that he's about to be. Sally's big daddy then returns to its feet and impales Booker with its massive drill. Booker looks into Elizabeth's eyes, and she simply watches as the life disappears from his. Elizabeth then finds herself in Paris, France, finally visiting her long-awaited ideal vacation location. Soon, though, her dreams turn nightmarish when she spots Sally, who is constantly just out of her reach, running towards a red balloon. Soon, bad turns to worse as Elizabeth sees Paris in flames. Still running through a labyrinth of the city's streets, Elizabeth finds herself at the door to Booker DeWitt's office. When she enters, she finds the furnace controls on the other side, and Elizabeth soon finds herself amongst the little sister version of Sally, who she then sees burning within a furnace. Elizabeth then comes to, seeing the corpse of Comstock beside her. Surrounding them are Atlas and his men, who are currently trying to grab Sally from the vent as well. As Atlas tells his men to dispose of Elizabeth, she sees a vision of Booker, telling her to claim that she can get Atlas back to Rapture. She does so, and Atlas asks how she intends to do that, which Booker tells her is Sue Chong. Following his directions, Elizabeth claims to be the doctor's lab assistant, offering their help getting them back to Rapture in exchange for Sally. Atlas lets Elizabeth live, throwing her a shortwave radio before his men knock her out again. When Elizabeth awakens, she finds herself in the toy department of Fontaine's department store. She spots the radio and begins to hear a call from Booker, who taunts her for using Sally as bait to take revenge on Comstock. Booker asks Elizabeth if she's feeling like herself, and she suddenly realizes that she can no longer see what's beyond the doors. When she brushes aside some rubble, Elizabeth is shocked to see her own dead body, killed by the same Big Daddy that did Comstock in. A confused Elizabeth's nose then begins to bleed, and when she looks at her little finger, she sees that it's now restored. Elizabeth then finds herself in the rowboat with the Luteces, and they take her to the lighthouse to Rapture. Knowing that she can't just leave Sally to rot so she can simply get revenge on Comstock, Elizabeth enters the lighthouse. She then returns to the universe in which she died, against the twins' warning that it might cause her very multiversal being to collapse. Left without any of her supernatural abilities due to this quantum superposition, Elizabeth is forced to sneak around nearby splicers, using an air grabber as defense while she looks for Suchong. Luckily, she soon finds a crossbow and plasmids that she can use to defend herself. While searching for Suchong, Elizabeth finds evidence of something called the ace in the hole that the doctor has. While she finds no sign of Suchong in his office, she does find signs that the doctor was aware of Columbia, Booker, and herself. She then discovers how Suchong was able to know what he knew, a Lutece device in his lab partially opening a tear to Columbia. Elizabeth then realizes that while she can no longer open tears to escape Rapture, she could bring the Lutece particle from Columbia to raise the city back to the surface. While the machine is currently in a state of disrepair, Elizabeth is able to decode Suchong's secret schematics to learn how to return it to working order. Elizabeth then gathers the necessary parts to repair the Lutece device and fixes it, getting the tear to Columbia completely open. She enters it, emerging in the First Lady airship. Knowing it utilizes a Lutece particle to float, Elizabeth grabs its spare quantum particle and returns it to the tear. Unfortunately, she finds it now closed by Suchong, who only agrees to allow her to come back through if she brings him a hair sample from a nearby Fink lab. As she makes her way to the lab, Elizabeth overhears Daisy Fitzroy speaking to the Luteces about how she'll kill Fink, but not his son. The Luteces convince Fitzroy that she doesn't need to actually harm the boy, just give no choice but for Elizabeth to intervene. Fitzroy, trusting the Luteces' word that this will lead to the ultimate downfall of Comstock, agrees to their plan. After using Fink's elaborate clock-based pathway system, Elizabeth finds the way to his lab, seeing the version we saw earlier of herself and Booker being confronted by Daisy Fitzroy. Elizabeth realizes that Daisy sacrificed herself to make her a killer, giving her the strength and maturity to complete her journey. She then finds more evidence of the collaboration between Suchong and Fink, learning of how she and Songbird became imprinted. Elizabeth then finds the hair sample Suchong was searching for, that of a girl who was imprinted by the Songbird. Yes, this means Elizabeth was on a quest to retrieve a sample of her own hair. With the sample in hand, Elizabeth returns to the tear, passing by Fitzroy's corpse on the way. After returning to Rapture through the tear and giving the sample to Suchong, her conversation with the doctor is interrupted by none other than Andrew Ryan, who accuses Elizabeth of being a thief. He then claims that while he had a deal with Atlas, his working with her is a clear betrayal of it, and he further states that if Atlas won't be cooperative, he'll be liquidated. Ryan then asks Elizabeth if she'll choose to work for him or die with Atlas. Ryan's men then arrive, and Elizabeth summons all of her might to fight them off. In the wake of the battle, she determines that the best place to place the Lutece particle would be in Frank Fontaine's office. Atlas gets her access to the private elevator, and Elizabeth takes it up to the office. On the trip up, she receives another call from Ryan, who warns her about working with Atlas. Elizabeth gets to Fontaine's office and places the particle. As the building begins to lift, Elizabeth asks Atlas for Sally. Unfortunately, the man double-crosses her, and his men arrive, knocking her out with chloroform. Elizabeth then awakens after the attack on the Kashmir restaurant, held captive by Atlas. Still believing Elizabeth to be Suchong's assistant, they begin to question her about the ace in the hole. When she denies any knowledge, they inject her with truth serum, which only puts her out of consciousness for another 2 weeks. When Elizabeth finally awakens, she finds the Rapture civil war well underway, and Atlas continues to question her about the ace in the hole. When she still refuses to answer, Atlas threatens to lobotomize her, but Elizabeth simply tells him that he'd be doing her a favor by making her forget. Atlas then switches his strategy by instead threatening the same procedure to a captive Sally. Suddenly, Elizabeth finds herself before Booker, who awakens the memories in her in which she saw all of the open doors to every possible reality, including ones in the future. He then leads her to a room with the ace, which is in Suchong's clinic. Elizabeth comes to and tells Atlas where the ace is, and offers to retrieve it for him in exchange for Sally's release once and for all. Inside Suchong's lab, Elizabeth finds an injured Big Daddy, and when she attempts to repair it, 2 nearby little sisters inject their bonded atom into him to restore him to full health. This Big Daddy, as it turns out, is the one that ends up killing Dr. Yi Suchong. Next to his corpse, Elizabeth finds the ace, a message encoded in Suchong's secret code. Elizabeth returns to Atlas and hands the ace over to him, and he proceeds to smash her over the face with a wrench. When he goes to read the message, however, he finds that he is unable to. Atlas demands the translation from Elizabeth, and as she sees the events that are about to unfold involving Jack arriving at Rapture, she tells Atlas that it says, "Would you kindly?" This sets in motion the events that Jack carries out, including every possible outcome of his story, most notably the reality where he rescues the little sisters, now including Sally. Content that she's redeemed herself and caused the rescue of Sally and all of the other little sisters in Rapture, this Elizabeth dies peacefully, bringing us to the end of the stories of both Rapture and Columbia in one fell swoop. This is the last we've seen of the world of Bioshock so far, but who knows? Maybe one day we'll find another man, another lighthouse, and another city in one of the infinite universes we've yet to explore. Hey everybody, thank you for joining me on this journey through the skies of Columbia and the depths of Rapture. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into your favorite games. Special thanks to all the folks on screen for their support. They click those links in the description, and you should too. This has been Suggestive Gaming, and now you're in the know.